Big Bang Theory's final Christmas episode made young Sheldon's George S.R. cheating story worse. When The Big Bang Theory aired its final Christmas-themed episode in Season 12, it was meant to be a warm farewell to one of the sitcom's most beloved holiday traditions. Over the years, Christmas had been a running source of humor and heartache, especially when filtered through Sheldon Cooper's eccentricities. But looking back now, in light of everything young Sheldon revealed about George Sr.'s storyline, that seemingly lighthearted holiday special hits differently, and in some ways makes Sheldon's father's controversial arc of cheating feel even messier. The Christmas episode should have been just another quirky romp about Sheldon's hang-ups with gifts or his ongoing battles with holiday traditions. Instead, it inadvertently deepened the cracks between the canonical portrayal of Sheldon's family in The Big Bang Theory and the more fleshed-out, emotionally complex version we came to know through young Sheldon. And at the center of that rift is George S.R., a man remembered very differently in each show. The final Christmas episode of The Big Bang Theory, the show's last Christmas outing, arrived in Season 12, Episode 10, The VCR Illumination. On the surface, it's a sweet and sentimental story. Sheldon, feeling dejected after a scientific setback, rediscovers hope when Amy shows him an old VHS recording of his younger self. In the tape, a 9-year-old Sheldon is talking to his future self, urging him to persevere through hardships. It's a beautiful payoff to Sheldon's long journey, but the part that really stands out now is what we see in the background. Sheldon's father, George S.R., lounging in his chair and occasionally interacting with his young son. It's not much, just snippets, but it was the first and only time The Big Bang Theory gave us a real glimpse of George beyond Sheldon's bitter anecdotes. To longtime fans, George was almost mythological, painted in broad, unflattering strokes. Throughout the series, adult Sheldon referenced his dad as a man who drank too much, yelled a lot, and most damningly, cheated on my mom. Those offhand remarks created a permanent image of George Sr. as a lousy father and husband. So when the Christmas VHS scene appeared, it was shocking. George didn't look like a monster at all. He looked like a regular, tired dad, even affectionate in a quiet way. That little moment reframed everything. But once young Sheldon began peeling back the truth about George, the Christmas episode's quiet cameo became even more complicated. How young Sheldon softened George S.R. If The Big Bang Theory was merciless in its portrayal of George, young Sheldon has been almost the opposite. Lance Barber's version of George Sr. is far from perfect, but he's sympathetic, an overworked, underappreciated man trying to hold together a family with a son he doesn't always understand. Instead of the caricature described by adult Sheldon, viewers saw a layered man, funny, flawed, and deeply human. The cheating storyline has been the biggest sticking point. Since The Big Bang Theory repeatedly mentioned that George was unfaithful, young Sheldon couldn't ignore it. But rather than leaning into scandal, the spin-off dragged out the inevitability of that moment, complicating it with context. George Sr. is often shown as lonely in his marriage to Mary, feeling disconnected from a wife more devoted to church and Sheldon's genius than to him. Meanwhile, Brenda Sparks, the Cooper family's neighbor, emerges as a source of temptation. The way young Sheldon built toward the cheating arc made George more sympathetic than the offhand Big Bang comments ever did. Instead of a cruel betrayal, it's framed as the tragic result of years of neglect and personal dissatisfaction. The cheating is not excused, but it is understood. And this is where the final Christmas episode of The Big Bang Theory makes things worse. The Christmas episode, as a collision of narratives, that holiday VHS scene shows George Sr. not as a drunken philanderer, but as a normal, even-kind father. To an audience who later watched young Sheldon, it fits perfectly with Barber's portrayal. But it also amplifies the tragedy of how Sheldon himself remembered him. Why would Sheldon, who clearly had loving moments with his dad, cling only to the uglier memories? The cheating revelation offers a clue. If George truly betrayed Mary, then perhaps Sheldon's bitterness toward him makes sense. But young Sheldon's slow burn storytelling suggests that George wasn't an outright villain. His failings were products of complicated emotional circumstances. That nuance isn't present in The Big Bang Theory. Instead, we get the blunt memory of "he cheated," which strips George of empathy. By showing George in a tender holiday setting right before the spin-off soften him, the Christmas episode inadvertently highlighted just how inconsistent and uncomfortable the canon is. It's almost as if The Big Bang Theory unintentionally sabotaged young Sheldon's efforts to humanize George. What should have been a sweet Christmas moment became a reminder that, no matter how much context we add, the character's legacy is permanently marred by a throwaway sitcom joke. The emotional fallout for Sheldon. For Sheldon, Christmas was always complicated. He despised the rituals but craved the sentiment behind them, often in ways he couldn't articulate. The VHS tape brought him comfort because it reminded him of his resilience, but tucked inside that memory was something else, a father he'd long since reduced to a punchline. Looking back, the Christmas episode shows us that Sheldon's trauma surrounding George Sr. might have been more about unresolved grief than pure resentment. He saw his father as someone who betrayed his family, and perhaps that colored every memory afterward. Young Sheldon deepens this by showing George trying to connect with his son despite their differences. It suggests that Sheldon, in his hyper-logical way, may have latched onto the most black and white interpretation of George's mistakes. Betrayal, to him, outweighed every act of kindness. Thus, the Christmas episode's glimpse of George smiling in the background feels almost cruel in hindsight. It shows what Sheldon lost, not just a father, but the ability to see his father as anything other than his flaws. Canon problems that won't go away. The George Sr. cheating story has always been one of the thorniest canon knots between The Big Bang Theory and young Sheldon. Fans debated endlessly whether young Sheldon would stick to the betrayal or rewrite history. The writers ultimately stayed faithful to canon, but they did so with far more nuance than Big Bang ever provided. The final Christmas episode, meant as a touching moment, unintentionally worsened this divide. On one hand, it confirmed George wasn't the irredeemable man Sheldon often described. On the other, it made Sheldon's bitterness harder to reconcile unless we accept the cheating as the defining wound of his childhood. In that way, the Christmas episode locked young Sheldon into a corner. By showing George as warm and present, it forced the spin-off to eventually justify why Sheldon remembered him so poorly. The only explanation left? The cheating. Why the Christmas episode still matters. Despite the mess it created, the Christmas episode is one of the most important bridges between the two shows. It's the rare moment when we see George through Sheldon's own childhood lens instead of through adult complaints. It humanizes George, but it also reveals the complexity of memory itself. Children often remember parents in extremes, heroes or villains, protectors or failures. Sheldon, with his rigid worldview, was especially prone to that kind of thinking. So when George cheated, that single act may have permanently overshadowed every softer moment, even the Christmas evenings spent together. By placing George in the background of a holiday memory, The Big Bang Theory unintentionally told us more about Sheldon than about his dad. It showed us that Sheldon, even as an adult genius, couldn't fully process the gray areas of family life. And that makes the cheating storyline all the more tragic, not just because George hurt Mary, but because it permanently tainted Sheldon's ability to remember his father with compassion.